implementation process for this. So I'm going to give a brief presentation just outlining the framework itself and really, I guess, what the nuts and bolts of it are, where you can download a copy of it if you want to look at it yourself, and then talk to you a little bit about our ideas about the timelines and the process for implementing this, and then listen to, we're here really to listen as well to your, answer any questions that we can and to hear your own sort of comments. So I was keen to be able to have a sort of the opportunity to, unfortunately, difficult to meet in person at the minute, but at least through a webinar to be able to have some interaction with the trainee community. So I might just go ahead. This competency framework was developed in collaboration with the National Endoscopy Programme and the National Endoscopy Training Committee, which has representatives from both the College of Surgeons, College of Physicians, and the Irish Society of Gastroenterology. And as you can see, there's a mixture of surgical and gastroenterology names and faces that many of you will recognise. So the committee's been working for some time on this, and I suppose when I was training to do GI endoscopy, it was very much according to a learn by doing philosophy. So I got some hands-on supervision at the beginning, and then really it was about getting into a room, getting as many procedures as I could, and by dint of doing lots and lots of colonoscopy over the course of my training, I was able to get to a stage where I was confident in performing endoscopy. There wasn't really, when I finished my GI training scheme, any sort of sign-off process, and I don't think I ever underwent a DOPS evaluation. So these are relatively recent developments, and really what we're looking to try and do with the new competency model is move a little bit towards a slightly more structured way of going about things. And in particular, I suppose the key changes are that obviously everybody goes through at the start of performing endoscopy, where you watch a few procedures, you get a sense of what's happening, you try and develop a sort of a mental picture of what you're trying to achieve, and there are simulators which are available in, I know some people use them in RCSI, which allow you to develop some of the, I guess, spatial awareness that's important. But most of us start off performing some or all of a procedure with a lot of hands-on assistance from an experienced endoscopist. And then over a course of time, we develop competency to be able to perform that procedure independently. And with the introduction of the new competency framework, we're sort of dividing the process or the pathway for endoscopy training into sort of two halves, let's say. The first period, when there's an expectation that people should receive more direct supervision, and until they become competent to or have the competency to be sort of left in a room by themselves to be able to complete procedures, and at that stage that they should undergo or receive a provisional approval, which is a type of sort of provisional certification of their skills to allow them to be in a room by themselves performing endoscopy, but still with a consultant or a certified endoscopist in the endoscopy unit. And during the course of then the second phase of training, rather than it being about hands-on supervision, it's about, I suppose, developing independence, developing therapeutic skills, and it's a period of kind of mentor practice when, in fact, people still undergo DOPS evaluations to assess their skills and competency, but where the focus and emphasis shifts towards monitoring of key performance indices in the way that happens for all independent endoscopists who participate in the National QI program. And then at the end of the training program, should that be in gastroenterology or general surgery, people should complete a final certification. So this is the document itself, the competency model for skills training in gastrointestinal endoscopy in Ireland. There's a copy of this is being sent at present to every endoscopy unit in the country, but you can download your own copy if you go to the web page of the HSE endoscopy program, and there's a program document section, and at the top of that page you can see the competency model and all of the various templates and forms that you might want that support the delivery of it are available for download individually there as well. So if you just put in HSE endoscopy program into Google, you should be able to find that very easily. Now, with introducing a competency model, I guess we're shifting very much away from the idea of you have to do a certain number of procedures to a philosophy of you have to demonstrate a certain level of competency or skill in a given procedure to be certified to perform that procedure. But I suppose it's important that we still recognise that numbers are important and that there's a strong association between the number of procedures that a trainee has performed and the competency that they've achieved. And that, as a general rule of thumb, we still suggest that most trainees should have performed 200 colonoscopies or 200 gastroscopies for upper GI endoscopy, but that particularly for colonoscopy, 200 is still probably the number that most people need to have performed in order to achieve competency. But recognizing the fact that a proportion of people may be competent after they've done 100 or 150 colonoscopies, and that a small proportion, small but not insignificant proportion of people may need to perform 300 or more colonoscopies in order to achieve that competency level. And so DOPS evaluation is the key tool that allows us to both be able to assess and then to be able to, I guess, document or certify a competency. And you'll all be familiar with the DOPS forms. So this is just a sample of a DOPS form for colonoscopy. And originally there was I guess the domains haven't changed very much. It's still very much focused on, well, there's certain things that we focus on before the procedure, then certain things during the procedure and certain things afterwards. But the let's say the assessment that the trainer performs during the course of DOPS is really they make an assessment for each of these individual elements and domains, what level of supervision the trainee requires for each of these different elements. And so you can see obviously that what we're aiming for is for people to be up at this end of the columns, either requiring minimal supervision or being competent for independent practice in all of these pre-procedure, procedural, and then post-procedural domains in terms of generating a report and management plan, and then these more global endoscopic non-technical skills. So that overall, when the trainer comes to then set objectives for the next stops or the next period of training, ideally what you want is a situation where the trainer is able to tick this competent for independent practice box on a consistent basis and isn't highlighting the need for significant supervision in any of the other domains. So the DOPS evaluation is really important, particularly during that initial phase of training when competency is being sort of like progressively acquired. Then the KQI data becomes more important then in the second phase after the provisional approval sort of process. But KQI data should be recorded all the way through, and we'd obviously strongly encourage everyone who's training in endoscopy to be registered with the NICWIS program, because obviously the NICWIS reports that are available on a quarterly basis, you're able to log in and see all of your, not just the volume of procedures that you've been performed, but also say for colonoscopy, you can see what your cecal intubation rates like, what your comfort scores are like, what your polyp detection rates are like, and you're able to assess how your use of sedation meets with or aligns with the targets that are set out by the QI program. There's obviously a situation can arise where someone undergoes the provisional approval process and then they're scoping for a while, and if their KPIs are reviewed and it's found that, say, for example, their cecal intubation rate isn't being, say, maintained above that 90% target, or that there are issues around some of the other KQIs, then the training lead within an individual unit can recommend that the provisional approval is temporarily suspended. And that reintroduces a requirement for more direct supervision for a trainee up until such time as, once again, using DOPS evaluation, they've demonstrated those skills are operating at a more consistent level. So this is just to summarize. Well, this is what's necessary for the provisional approval. The trainee needs to be registered as a NICWIS endoscopy user and be able to produce NICWIS reports that show the procedures they've performed to date and the KQIs that are associated with that. And we've left in a suggested number of procedures for upper and lower GI endoscopy of 200, really as a ballpark for people. It's not a mandatory figure, but very much a suggested minimum number. But the thing that is, let's say, mandatory is the DOPS evaluations. So the 4 most recent DOPS evaluations for either upper or lower GI endoscopy should record that the overall score is competent for independent practice and that no individual item or domain is scored as needing significant or maximal supervision. We're recommending everyone has done a basic skills course in GI endoscopy. And we're increasingly with the hands-on colonoscopy courses, and I'll talk a bit more about the courses in a second, with hands-on colonoscopy courses recommending that people should probably do these rather than at the end of their training program, that these should be done earlier in the course of training, probably if people do their basic skills course in the first year, aiming to do their hands-on colonoscopy course in the second year of their endoscopy training. This is the form that we've created to record provisional approval in GI endoscopy, and then this form can be brought from, if you're moving from one unit to another unit, you can bring this form with you. So you can see how it's pretty simple. It just records the fact that the QI record has been reviewed, that the DOPS evaluations have been performed and have met the necessary, that competent for independent practice bar, and then the trainee signs, your individual trainer signs, and then the unit training lead. So this is granted, or the provisional approval is granted at a unit level, but there's nothing to stop this provisional approval for certificate then being brought to your new endoscopy unit when you change roles. Now the training lead in your new unit may require some additional validation of the provisional approval, but this ought to be something that can be taken from place to place and makes it much easier to slot into a new endoscopy unit. And then the final certification process, once again, obviously it requires everything the provisional approval does, but in addition, so that a meaningful assessment can be made of the quality indicators, an additional 100 procedures, because you really need about 100 procedures to be able to make an accurate assessment of someone's completion rate and polyp detection rate. So an additional 100 procedures with satisfactory KPIs should be performed, and then the relevant summative DOPS evaluation should once again be scored competent for independent practice. But in addition, we're now recommending for final certification that people should complete a DOPS for GI bleeding and a DOPIS to demonstrate polypectomy skills, or the ability to be able to remove polyps less than 2 centimeters in size. Completion of both the basic and hands-on colonoscopy skills course, and we've developed now a GI bleeding course and are in the process of developing a wet lab polypectomy skills course, both of which we'd highly recommend for people before they do their final certification. And in due course, this is something that these may all become mandatory courses in time, but until such time as the courses are fully established and available on a consistent basis, we don't think it's fair to make those courses mandatory at present. This is the form, which is once again very similar to that for granting of the provisional approval, the difference being in this case that the sign-off is once again by the trainee and the trainer, but then this time it's the training program director. So it's the training program that provides the final certification, not the individual endoscopy unit that the trainee is working in. And so this is something which is submitted then to either the relevant college who would issue a final certificate of competence in GI endoscopy. And we've recognized that obviously courses are important as part of the backbone of learning. Most of the learning that you do in endoscopy is within the individual endoscopy unit. So it's on-the-job training, but it's important that there's a suite of appropriately framed skills training courses, and the basic endoscopy skills course, which has been run for a number of years here in St. Vincent's, and for the last 2 years we've run it as an online course, will continue to be run on an annual basis. And we're hoping, we've run it in September of last year, we hope to run it in September again of this year, using possibly some hands-on element or some face-to-face element, but quite possibly still a significant virtual component to it. Then the hands-on colonoscopy skills courses have been mandatory for completion of gastroenterology higher specialist training for a number of years now, and we're looking at trying to expand access to those to make them available on a consistent basis to all gastroenterology and general surgery trainees. We're working with both colleges to ensure that there's adequate capacity for everyone to be able to do those in a timely way. And then the GI bleeding skills course, we've run the first of those earlier this year, and hope to run those on an annual basis probably for people in year 3, 4 of their training schemes, and a polypectomy skills course probably more at the end then in the 4th year of endoscopy training. And then obviously, as well as providing courses for trainees, we also have a number of courses for consultants and trainers as well to try and improve things. So this is just some images from the STEPS GI bleeding course that we ran earlier this year. We had it was 50% gastroenterology trainees and 50% general surgery trainees, and we had a mixture of medical and surgical faculty. And it was a combination of case-based and some didactic teaching, with then wet lab stations where people got to try out different techniques which are important in the endoscopic management of upper GI bleeding. And I think the feedback was very positive about those. So we all appreciate that implementing a new sort of training framework like this at a time such as now, when obviously there have been a lot of difficulties with the delivery of training and delivery of courses over the last 18 to 24 months, that there have been a lot of challenges with this. And so we know that it's probably realistically going to take 2 to 3 years for us to be able to implement this competency framework. So we're aiming to have implemented the framework fully by the end of the 2024 training year, but we recognize that, it's possible it may take a little bit longer. And what we want to do is make sure that the introduction happens in a smooth way. So we're suggesting that obviously for people starting off in gastroenterology or general surgery training, where they're starting endoscopy, that they can now begin once again, obviously recording their procedures in the NICWIS program, doing their DOPS evaluations, and can go on then hopefully in the next year or two to seek the provisional approval step. For people who are sort of in the middle of their training scheme, we'd encourage people to start to gather the evidence in terms of their NQI, QI data, to gather evidence of the procedures they've performed, start to do their DOPS evaluations, and to seek provisional approval if they're at the stage where they feel they and their trainer feel that they're competent to be scoping independently. I suppose what we want to emphasize is that the absence of this provisional approval, that the absence of this certification, shouldn't at present be used to prevent trainees from performing endoscopy or continuing their training according to the sort of established kind of local procedures, but that this is certainly the direction that we need to be moving towards within the next 2 years, that this will then, having this provisional approval will become a requirement to be allowed to continue to scope independently. And then for trainees who are coming towards the end of their training, I think we recognise that that it's artificial to ask people to go through both the provisional and the final certification process, but that to consolidate this together, I think we ask people to obviously complete the overview of their training to date, undertake the DOPS evaluations, and then apply through their training program for the final certification towards the end of this training year. So there's definitely challenges in terms of delivering this. Obviously, there's big backlogs in endoscopy in a lot of places after the public health emergency, and obviously COVID has sort of reshaped our health service, sometimes in ways that are not helpful towards endoscopy training. There's also challenges for people who are outside the specialist training schemes, because the competency model has been introduced initially for people who are within higher specialist training in general surgery or gastroenterology. And we would still encourage, however, any NCHDs who are training in endoscopy outside of a structured training scheme, or nurse endoscopists who are training, that they should still follow the framework that the competency model offers, but that obviously the certification process requires the governance of a training body, and there's some work to be done in terms of trying to make that realistic for people outside of structured training schemes. I mean, it's a problem for the Irish Health Service more generally that we have a lot of trainee doctors outside of structured training schemes. And we're also pushing both from within the colleges and within the HSE that there's increased recognition and support for trainers and training centres to really try and promote the training agenda. So with that, I wanted to, I'll probably stop the presentation there. And what I wanted to do is really offer people the opportunity now to have some discussion, hear your comments about this, the model, and hear your questions about, and I'll do my best to answer whatever questions I can. But I really wanted to make you aware of this sort of development so that you can start to have the conversations with your own trainers and training leads. We've run a webinar already where we invited all the training leads, and we've made a recording of that available to everyone. And we'd encourage you to highlight this document and this development to your own trainers, and we'll continue the process of trying to disseminate that information through the various colleges. But with that, I think let's see if I can stop sharing now, yeah. And really, I can open it up now for if anybody has any comments or questions. Thanks for keeping muted, everybody, to make it a little bit easier. And I don't know if anybody has. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question, or go ahead there, I think. Maybe I've blown you all away. I think the raise hand function works, doesn't it? Yeah. So if anyone wants to raise their hands, feel free. So I suppose I'd encourage you, go back and I suppose highlight this development to your colleagues, your trainers. As I say, the unit training leads should all be aware of this development has taken place. We'll make a recording of this evening's webinar available for circulation to everyone in the gastroenterology and general surgery training program, so that you can sort of see particularly for that kind of implementation process, how we've sort of mapped out that we see it happening. That the introduction of, as I say, of the competency model shouldn't be a barrier to progress in training for people. But what I'd hope is that it'll add a structure to people's training in the future, and that for trainees in particular, sometimes if you're sort of left by yourself, without what you consider to be adequate supervision. It can be a frightening experience. You can feel a bit overwhelmed. And I suppose medical legally, you can be exposed as well. So one of the ideas of introducing a framework like this is to try and provide a level of protection for people that, like, if you are in a room by yourself doing procedures, that that there's a sort of a structure or a process that has been followed that supports you doing that. So if there are no other, John, do you want to come in with a question there? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Prof. I think the framework is very welcome and a real benefit to our training. My signal dropped out in a couple of parts, so you might already have answered it, but two questions. Are there competencies such as, for example, chromoendoscopy or large polypectomy? Do those have a place within the framework, or do you see them being added in the future? And secondly, I might have missed it, but the final summative evaluation that previously took place in a hospital that a trainee hadn't worked at before, is that where the final evaluation will still take place, or what's the setting?
So they're both very good questions. I suppose we've tried to with the competency framework set I suppose what you might call a minimum standard for people to have completed by the end of their training program. And so we focused on what we would consider to be the core skills, to be able to demonstrate competency in being able to manage GI bleeding and being able to remove polyps up to 2 centimeters in size. I would see there being certainly the potential, say, for example, to have, let's say, additional components added on to supplement the let's say documentation of competency and other sort of skills, both be that in upper and lower GI endoscopy, or ultimately, people have demonstrated skills in ERCP, EUS, other more advanced techniques, that there's no reason why in the future we couldn't sort of, let's say, add those into the certification process. But I suppose we're mindful that introducing this kind of change, we've tried to sort of stick with maybe trying to get the fundamentals right, get the basics right. But I can see a lot of scope for being able to add in additional competencies that are recorded, so that almost when you get that there could be almost when you get your final certification, a recognition of all of the skills that you've obtained. We had a lot of discussion about whether we should make it sort of mandatory. If you look at the document itself, it's not explicit that you have to do your final summative evaluation in a different hospital. And I suppose the reason that we did that was we were very aware that, particularly with COVID, it became very difficult for people in the last 2 years to be able to easily do that sort of thing where they go to a different hospital and have their sign off. And so I think while I think it's a good in terms of for the rigor of the process. It's a good thing to do. I think we've recognised that for practical purposes at the moment that it's perfectly acceptable to do that final certification within your own hospital, because I suppose as long as it's underscored by the QI data and the QI record, and I guess the whole suite of the DOPS evaluations that you undergo, that there's no particular reason why someone has to go to a different institution, given the challenges with that at the moment.
Thanks very much.
Rachel, do you want to come in there with a question or a comment?
Yeah, sorry, I joined a little bit late as well, so I might have just missed it, but I just wanted to clarify, is it, so, I did a standalone red year and now I'm in my first SPR year as such, but for me to kind of join the program, would I have to, is it DOPS 4 times to get a provisional competency? Is that the plan? Is it 4 times in one institution, or is it over kind of a series of months, years, etc.?
I think once again, we haven't explicitly said that those 4 DOPS all have to be done in the one institution, as long as the DOPS forms have been completed to the to the satisfactory level. That will be, to some degree, I think, to begin with, a little bit at the discretion of the local unit training lead, if they're happy to accept DOPS that have been performed elsewhere. And I would have thought, or would have suggested, that certainly any endoscopy training that takes place, so say, for example, if you do a standalone registrar year and then you come into the SPR program, but you've already done a year of endoscopy training, that there's no reason not to, like, that training should count towards your progress through the competency framework. So it doesn't have to start from when you're starting your actual SPR scheme. It can very much start at the time of the as soon as you start training in endoscopy. And so for what I'd encourage is that people, if you know people who are doing endoscopy training outside of a training scheme, but applying and hoping to enter a training scheme, that those individuals should certainly be aware of the training framework, collect their QI data, do their DOPS evaluations, collect the stuff as they go along, showing that they're developing their skills, because it will allow them to receive the provisional approval more quickly once they actually enter the scheme itself. Ava, did you want to come in with a question as well? Yeah.
Hi, Ralph. Thanks. That's a great talk. I just wanted to ask, say, obviously this is the beginning of the kind of competency modeling as such, but would it be looked at, do you think, in the future, maybe like almost like a broad curriculum of where you should be at a certain point at year 1 or year 2, just so that it's not, you wouldn't get to the end of your 5 years and then maybe be told you're kind of subpar, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the philosophy behind this is exactly that. Like, I think at the moment there's a lot of people who end up doing, say their hands-on colonoscopy course in their final year, because they know they have to get that, signed off before they finish their gastroenterology program. It's not mandatory in general surgery at the moment. But so there's a lot of people who like, say, do that course towards the end, do their final, the sort of their summative evaluation and their sort of final sign off for endoscopy in their final year. And you're quite right that if, like, say, you and you would hope that the existing end of year assessments and trainer evaluations would highlight if there are people who are struggling in particular areas, but certainly there's a value to identifying if someone needs extra training or extra support, identifying that earlier in the course of their training scheme. It's a bit late when you get into your final year, and so that's why I'm pushing the idea of bringing, say, for example, the hands-on colonoscopy course from something that's done towards the end of training to really something that should be, right back at the beginning. In ideally, I suppose we've tried to map it out that be kind of one course that you have to do each year. So the basic skills course in year 1, and maybe the hands-on colonoscopy course in year 2, but that it should very much be earlier in the course of training. And the provisional approval process, if that's, I would see that as being something. I mean, if you take that ballpark figure of about 200 colonoscopies, if you're doing an endoscopy list a week and you're able to get 2 or 3 colonoscopies a week, most trainees should be able to complete that provisional approval process, hopefully at some stage in the second year of their training program. So that means that there's plenty of time after that then to once again go on and develop the sort of therapeutic skills and polypectomy skills, but also it does provide a sort of let's say, a cushion, because there will be some people who need a bit extra to get to the competency. As you saw from that histogram, there's some people who may need to do 300 or even 350, 400 procedures to hit that level. And so for those people, at least there's that cushion that they're not going to run out of time as readily. So I hope exactly it will help people to both help the training schemes to identify if there are people who are struggling a little bit, who need some extra help or some extra support for whatever reason, but also allow trainees themselves. Like, obviously you're all assessing your own skills on an ongoing basis, and I think DOPS allows you to sort of know, well, where do I stand at the minute, or how do I sort of rank myself, both both against, against my peers, but also crucially against the sort of standard that you're working towards. So it gives you a very concrete outline, hopefully, of what you're kind of working towards during your training.
Great, thanks very much.
So look, I'm conscious at the end of the day, and I'm sure you've all had a busy one. So look, if there's no other questions or comments, I'd just like to thank everybody for logging in. Thanks to Dorothy for setting this up and organising it. And we've recorded the webinar this evening, and we'll make it available to everybody. Therefore, that you can circulate it both to your colleagues within the training schemes, but actually I'd actively encourage you to share it as well with, if you have, say, colleagues who are like, first year registrars who are applying to a specialist training scheme, to make them aware of the development of the competency framework. I think it's something we want to get the message out there, and we're going to continue our own efforts as well, I suppose, to try and then make the trainers and training leads more aware of I suppose, just the practical aspects of how this is going to work. And hopefully some of you will begin to start getting your provisional approval signed off in the coming months. And I'm very open to hearing feedback on either if there are growing pains or teething pains with how this gets rolled out. We want to hear about it, so you can contact myself or contact Dorothy, because we're very actively interested in seeing sort of what the feedback is on the delivery of this new sort of system, and if there are practical things that are barriers to implementation, it'd be useful if we can know about those, so we can try and overcome some of those. So we're working on some YouTube clips to assist trainers in how to perform a DOPS evaluation, because I know there are still a few trainers out there who, let's say, maybe have their own ideas about what a DOPS should be, but just to try and make sure that it's happening in a standardized and consistent way. And if there's other learning resources that you think would be useful, either for trainees or trainers, as I say, we're very open to your feedback and your ideas. So. But with that in mind, thanks, Dorothy, and thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening. Have a nice Christmas if I don't see you all, and see you all soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. I'll be in touch with the recording.